JORDANNA KOPPEL. I'm an attending physician in the Pediatric Emergency Department at Southfield Children's Hospital at Tel Shomer. It's really what comes to mind. We're still here. I've spoken to so many groups who come from the States, South Africa, all over the world really. And when they hear our story, they ask us, how are we processing? How have we processed the trauma from the original day? And explain to them that we're still going through this, and so it's hard to process trauma that's ongoing. I think about a few days ago when there was a siren again at 6:30 in the morning, and again my safe room wasn't prepared. Again, I grabbed my children without my glasses and ran to put them in the safe room. Brought me way back to October 7th when I think about the patients I saw that day that did the same thing but didn't live far enough away like me, and lived in places like Faraza where in their safe room they were being attacked. And it's very raw. I would say it's still very raw. We're still living through this. The hostages are still there. War is ongoing with no end in sight, and yeah, it's the first thought comes to mind. We're still here. Can't believe it. I think there was a lot of guilt. I haven't visited my family in the States in over a year, and I haven't had the opportunity to do so, and there was a feeling of a lot of guilt in leaving the country when my brother-in-law is serving, when the hostages are still underground. And it was difficult for me to leave the country, and the ethos of the country is so enmeshed in what's going on that when you leave the airport and you scan your own passport ID, before your picture is scanned, you see a picture of a hostage. And so it's just etched in our mind. And it's hard to get away from that. I feel like very connected, more connected to the land, to the people from all walks of the spectrum. Sometimes it can be tiring. I think of a case of a few weeks ago when I was in the emergency department. Some patients are frequent flyers, and I recognized them. I treated them, their siblings, I recognized their parents, and there was a child kind of jumping around happily. And I said to myself, I know this kid. I've treated him. What would I treat him for? Was it a cut, something, fever? What could it have been? He looks so familiar to me. And I did this kind of deja vu. Realized I've never met this child. He's just the striking image of Ariel Bibas. And these children, the faces of the hostages, are so enmeshed in our very existence that I've never met this child, but I've seen so many videos. I feel like I know him. I feel like I know Hirsch through his story. And that's a very powerful connection. A very painful connection, but very powerful. So as a, I would say, immigrant, not so new immigrant, it's almost 9 years, yes, I feel a certain connection that's even stronger, but it's almost a sad one. And as we go through this, we continue to go through this together, and try and uphold each other and give each other support for the next stages, which are big unknown. There's been a high uptick in patients with anxiety, with depression. This is unfortunately a trend that we saw after Corona, maybe died down a little bit and then rose again. And we've been talking about a multi-center study to actually look into have there been more attempt at suicide in the wake of October 7th, very specifically connected to where are these patients coming from. Are they coming from the Gaza perimeter? Are they coming from the Merkaz? Were they exposed firsthand to the violence of the day? And I think it's very important data because there are things that it's very easy to give weight to the people who are actually fighting, the people who live in the perimeter now, but we can't forget that there are displaced people and that their mental health is of utmost importance. And so that's definitely something that we've been seeing and are looking to prove. I think it becomes more raw when I see victims who are displaced and are coming here because they live nearby now. The most raw moment, which I've described before, was a boy who came in with his mother, and when she came in, she smiled, and I immediately had flashbacks to October 7th when they were covered head to toe in soot. And he had to hide under his bed while terrorists, with his sister, while terrorists were ransacking their house and tried to burn it down. And in that very day, mother was just resolute, calm, which was chilling, but what needed to be done for children at the time. And she had brought it in for a completely different reason. A couple weeks later, their father was in rehab here. At the time, they didn't know what happened to him. In retrospect, he was trying to get back to them and help. He was shot. And they were here for a simple reason, and he needed to get some antibiotics, and the mother went to buy some, and she asked me if I could watch him. He was 12, no problem, on me. And when she was gone, the only thing that he was willing to do at that time was search through her phone and swipe through pictures of his house and talk to me about how his house had burnt down, and this is what it looks like now, and in this trance about what had happened to him. And I realized months later that the emotional trauma that he's gone through is something that can never be fully rectified. There's no treatment for that kind of trauma that expunges it entirely. And that was very painful for me to realize the after effects firsthand from children who had gone through it, survivors of October 7th, who had been firsthand witnesses. And everybody was a victim in some sense on that day, but to have gone through that as a 12-year-old firsthand, and your whole world has crashed down, and now you're living in a displaced home with other people from your community. It's on one hand a milieu that you can try and heal with the people that you knew from before, but on the other hand, we're still going through this, and it's difficult. It's definitely difficult, and it's heartbreaking to see the psychological terror and trauma that those victims continue to experience. So the patient that I just described was a boy 12 years old, and he and his sister were hiding under a bed, like the Holocaust, when a few terrorists actually came through their home and started stealing and looting, destroying things, and didn't realize that they were under the bed. And I asked him how he was feeling. He said that his head hurt, and I asked him why. And the terrorists had sat down on the bed, and there were metal bars on the bed that collapsed on him. And he couldn't even scream out from pain. He just had to keep silent and watch his house come apart in front of his eyes. And then the terrorists set fire to his home, and they were, by some grace of God miracle, able to escape, all while not knowing where their father was at the time. And in retrospect, he was shot. He was in the Kitat Konenut, which is the local police enforcement for this kind of event. And when he found out that his own family was in peril, he tried to get back and save them, and he wasn't able to. He was shot. And these are all things I found out months later because he told me when he came to visit the emergency room for different reasons. So he, his mother, and his sister were covered head to toe in soot, and we monitored them for smoke inhalation. We admitted them overnight, and I still remember this mother-cub state of resilience and calm, and she understood very, very clearly that she couldn't show any other front to her children. Even though they didn't know where their father was, even though their whole life just burned down in front of their eyes, even though their own lives were at risk and within their own home, she understood quite clearly that if she didn't stay strong for those children, then their whole world would tumble down. And it was a lesson in parenting, to be honest, to see that resoluteness and to recognize that calm smile of hers months later is etched on my mind. Unbelievable. I had one group from the States come and ask me about divisiveness in the department with regards to the war, because it seems to be a phenomenon in the States where there are two different sides, and it comes out at war. It comes out at work. And it was very shocking to me that so far away there's so much divisiveness, and here there's a sense of utopia and coexistence that doesn't exist elsewhere. There's none of that here. Here the ultimate goal is to treat the patient. It doesn't matter what your ethnic background is. On the day of October 7th, the head trauma surgeon is actually an Israeli Arab, and nobody thought twice about that. This was trauma that happened to Israeli society, be that if you're Christian or you're Muslim or you're Jewish, it didn't really matter. And so when you have a cause of healing everybody, it really doesn't matter. And so it was something that was interesting to see that so far away has become such a big issue, whereas here it's not at all, at least on the day-to-day. I think about my colleagues who have had to do reserve work and continue living, or spouses whose work here and their spouses were taken away for reserve work for weeks, months on end, with children, showing up on time, showing up with full force. Really, really impressive, unbelievable. I think about a resident of ours whose husband is a physician at a different hospital and is a physician in training, and had to take his boards right after he came back from weeks in Gaza. They have children, and passed it with flying colors, which is quite extraordinary. The Israeli people are really a phenomenon of how he could compartmentalize and manage to excel when what he had to experience during this horrible past few months, and what his wife went through to save integrity and show up at work every day and put in her all. It's just remarkable, just remarkable. The people of this country are strong. It's easier to see as an outsider. I always speak about the 7th when nobody knew what was happening, and I received text messages that were frantic, that there was a mass casualty incident, all hands on deck. I didn't think it was real. I didn't believe it, but I came. And in my walk from the pediatric emergency department to the adult trauma bay, where we were waiting for patients, I saw a mass of people, and I didn't quite understand what they were doing there. Maybe I missed a siren, but definitely wasn't a safe zone. And it wasn't until the CEO of the hospital, Professor Kreis, stood there and thanked everybody for coming. He apologizes for there not being enough chairs, but he wants to thank them for showing up and giving blood, that I understood that these were patients, some of them, and families of patients who heard something was happening, and this was their way of contributing. And it's very different from other cultures which try and empathize and say, let me know if I can help. Whereas the people here, if you speak about resilience, showed up, pulled up their sleeves and said, here I am, I'm here to help. This is how I can give. It's incredible, really incredible, and it gave me a lot of strength, not knowing then what I was going to see within the next many hours coming ahead, that this is a people with a strong and iron heart, and I have to aspire to that in order to do what I need to do for that day. I think it's upsetting. I think it's hard for me to know that where I came from, in restaurants near my home, there are bricks being thrown through the window. It's difficult for me to hear that. And my mother has an office in the garment district in Times Square in Manhattan. And the super of the building asked her if they were going to be putting up a menorah this year. And she said, of course, next to the Christmas tree, there's always a menorah. And he said to her, that's all fine and well, but if it's okay with you, I'm going to put it away at the end of the day, because the buildings that have been leaving the menorah out overnight have their windows smashed. Like Kristallnacht. It's hard for me to envision that where I called home for so long and still in some way call my birth home is going through that. I have a conference that I'll be going to where I'll be part of the faculty, and there will be a lot of introductions and what hospital do you work in, and I'm already thinking about it 6 weeks ahead of time. What kind of reception will I get when I say that, oh, I work in a hospital outside of Tel Aviv. I'm here to teach. I'm not here to discuss politics. I'm certainly not here to discuss war. And it's definitely a concern of mine, and it's upsetting. And I think about where we were before the war, where we had a steady stream of patients from Gaza and patients from the West Bank, and that's definitely dwindled. We have no patients from Gaza currently, as far as I know, or as far as I've seen in the emergency room in the past few months. And when I spoke to Biden, it was important for me to tell him that we treat everybody and we don't discriminate. And when a resident calls me at night and says that the patient's not doing well, I have a question, I don't start asking where the patient is originally from. It doesn't factor in to the treatment. And what's upsetting is that when I met with Biden a month after October 7th and explained this to him, that we treat everyone equally, what can we expect for our hostages over there? Can we at all expect the same medical treatment for them? And the answer, so many hundreds of days later, remains the same, that no, we can't. Our hostages are exterminated at arm's length. Our hostages are not receiving any medical care, or are receiving very, very basic medical care. And the discrepancy is difficult. It's definitely difficult to continue going on and strive for a goal where we treat everybody the same, and then knowing that we may or may not have children there who are still alive, who aren't receiving any medical care. And it's very difficult as a healthcare provider to know that the basic human rights to healthcare are not being upheld in the same way. When I was working on October 7th, a big part of my contribution was helping with triage and looking for pediatric patients, and helping the adult emergency medicine physician who was standing at the entrance to the hospital decide about the severity of the case and what wing they should go to based on that, and then helping mobilize the patient and then coming back for more. And in doing that, I pretty much saw everything that came in, which was incredibly traumatic. And I held that trauma for a long time. It felt almost voyeuristic, even though I'm a physician and this is my job and I can help these people, and I'm not just some rubbernecker, I'm not just watching, I'm actually doing something, I'm actually helping, but it didn't feel like enough. Because when you see patients that sick, in those numbers, you feel helpless. It doesn't matter how qualified you are, you will just feel helpless. And I will say that the adult emergency room came together, and I've never seen a more efficient handling of so many critically ill patients. There was never a point when we needed supplies or a doctor or an x-ray and that wasn't a possibility. But in the end, the accumulation of everything I saw was difficult for me, and felt, again, the word I felt was voyeuristic. And when I found out that I would be meeting with Biden, it gave me a sense of clarity of what my role was in that day, that my role was to also heal, but be that eyewitness for everything that came into Sheba Medical Center that day. And when I was able to impart that story upon ears that could do something, it felt very redeeming. It was for me that I had shared my story and our story, our nation's story, with somebody who can actually help us and do something. And so that was a really incredible experience for me. And as I said before, to impart to him that we treat all patients equally, and why is it so difficult to get the Red Cross to our patients? Why can't we accept the same treatment for them? That was a goal of mine, and part of it was telling him about what happened, and the other part was the request of, why can't we get anyone to see our hostages? Why can't we accept the same standard of care? And so it was incredible, that moment of being able to share this with him, and I really felt that he had come to listen. He'd really just come to listen and be with us in that time. It was very short-lived, because I remember driving home and Air Force One took off, and within less than an hour on my way home, there were already rockets, and I had to stop off of the highway, and I'm lying on the floor in the same dress that I just met the leader of the free world, next to this woman who had a newborn baby in her arms, and it seemed so surreal that it was all such a blur. It was so surreal, really, again, to have been spoken to the leader of the free world and hoped for some change, and then so soon after to find myself lying on the floor in the same dress. It kind of reminds you of where we still are, and there was a rocket fired at us only a few days ago. We're still here. It's upsetting, it's disturbing. It's hard to process. It's definitely hard to process. We want this war to end. We really do. And we want our hostages home almost at any price. And we're being ripped at the seams because of it. Because of the sins that no man left behind. And that's who we've always been. Think about Entebbe, if you think about now. And we're still bleeding. And we really are. And we're strong people, so we continue to go to work and send our kids to school and show up in the high tech and the startup nation and all of that. But when we lose one, when we lose a hostage, when we lose a soldier, that's a whole universe to us. It's a whole universe. And so we really do wish that this will end. We really do. And it's just, at this point, not a possibility, which is sad, for political reasons, for security reasons. And I just hope that we can get back to a place where my 5-year-old isn't scared to sleep at her room at night by herself anymore, where she doesn't remember what to do in an air raid siren. I just hope that we can get to a place again where on both sides, children don't need to know what to do when a bomb is hanging over their head. And I think about how we're living in a world where targeting a hospital just happens and is okay. And I think about when we met Biden, that was right after Israeli Defense Forces were accused of aiming our artillery at a hospital, and which caused a lot of damage to the hospital itself, and it turned out to be an Islamic Jihad misfired missile. Biden had affirmed that. But I think about how this past weekend, and for weeks, there were missiles being targeted at the emergency department here. And I had to decide on life-saving treatment or deferring it, because I had to mobilize patients, multiple drips and oxygen, and requiring more than a few people to mobilize the patient into a safe area, and everybody foregoing their own safety, because it doesn't take a minute to disconnect a child who's in critical condition in the resuscitation bay from all of their drips and lines and monitors. And to understand that that's unacceptable.